Hello everyone, it's me, Janky Pizu, coming in with another video. It's Thursday, back in Anita Berber Park. Not posted anything for a while because, well, I've not made any videos for a while because myself and like probably most of you, we've all had our eyes and witnessing the shit that's been going on in the great evil empire that is the United States. You know, witnessing the incredible police brutality and murder of innocent black people, George Floyd, Rayshard Brooks, Breonna Taylor, Toyin, many more, countless more, and also the incredibly repressive atrocities conducted against peaceful Black Lives Matter protesters. Now, of course, this has always been the modus operandi of the United States. You know, it's no secret that the whole history has been based on establishing and maintaining a system of white supremacy. But I feel now any veneer of freedom, democracy, you know, all these empty words that they throw around, firmly out the window. And, you know, the curtain has really been lifted. The whole world is watching. So yeah, the past few weeks has been a time for, you know, educating yourself, elevating black voices and really paying attention and calling out these fucking shitty situation. But I thought now, on this waning crescent moon, I mean it's daytime, but the waning crescent moon, the eve of the solstice, where, you know, it seems like the whole world is burning, but the tides of justice seem to be turning, I thought I would share with you all a few what I like to call hex-positive practices of social resistance. Hex-positive resistance. Okay, so what is that? So it's a term, I didn't make it up myself, but I really enjoy it. And I've seen a lot of other witchcraft practitioners, you know, they like to curse, they like to hex, but I've never seen someone like clearly defined hex-positivism. So for me, hex-positive witchcraft, it's about recognizing and acknowledging the world is a pretty fucked up place, or maybe better, the social system in which we live in, one that's structured by white supremacy, capitalism, patriarchy, colonialism, complete rape of nature. Recognizing this and, you know, vowing to take action, wanting to do something about it, because, you know, witchcraft has always been a resource for those on the margins to, you know, get to challenge injustices served to them and renegotiate unequal situations of power. Now, a lot of kind of, this is a word I discovered the other day, white lighter witches, you know, people who are all love and light, probably against hexing, comes from quite a privileged position, you know, if you can't accept that some people might need to do these kinds of magic, probably have no idea of what it's like to live in this world and not be in a position of privilege. So yeah, hex-positivism. So aside from that, there's also the ethics. Okay, so maybe once to recognise that sometimes a cheeky hex, a curse is kind of justified. Then there's the ethics of it. So, you know, there's this idea, specifically in like Wiccan circles, I believe, the law of the threefold. So it's like whatever magic, whatever energy you send out into the world, it'll come back 3 times stronger. So the theory behind this would be like, if you send out a curse, a hex, you're gonna get it 3 times harder than the one you sent out. But I personally believe, from an ethical perspective, if you are hexing in the name of social justice, then you're going to be on the right side of history, and I think probably it's going to do some good in the world, you know. And then again, even if the law of the threefold applies, I was thinking about this last night, us white witches, maybe we should consider it as kind of a form of spiritual reparations, you know, from our position of privilege, you can probably take a bit of like law of threefold. Come at me, I'm going to send my curses, sort out the world, well, attempt to dismantle this shitty system in which we find ourselves. Come back at me, karma. If the system of karma means that someone, you know, hexing police or hexing white supremacy comes back with 3 times worse karma, well, I challenge you, karma system. So there's that. We've covered privilege, ethics. What have I got next? Okay, decided to move so that, you know, following the sun. But so we've discussed privilege, ethics, something I forgot to say as well, like when I'm talking about Hex-Positivism, kind of something where you leave your ego aside, you know, I'm not saying we should hex our housemate when they drink the last bit of milk or run out of tea bag or something. It's against like structures of society. Individuals is a different story, but I personally believe like if you're in a political position and assume the mantle of power, you should leave yourself open to be subjected to a violent and bloody coup. Okay, and so that out the way. Third issue. Okay, so now that we've addressed any white lighter, witches, magical practitioners who say that politics has no place in the magic privileged position, what about atheistic anarchists who might say that there's no place for magic in politics? But to that, I think it's a very good tool and resource and platform through which to critique and challenge power. Not the only way, but a lot of politics does take place in kind of the spectral realms, you know, through symbols and imagery. A charismatic politician might, you know, capture the hearts and minds of the people, and lots of rhetoric and negotiation of power. So kind of use a lot of similar principles. So definitely, in my personal opinion and many others, that there's a good overlap between magic and political practice, and this is why us witches, especially white witches, need to step up our game and get involved. So cursing, hexing. Now, it's not for everyone. I understand this. It might not be part of your magical practice, but that doesn't mean you should not study it, discover it, and definitely shouldn't like go against it or critique witches who are hex positive. You know, of course, I think in these kind of struggles and day-to-day existence, healing, very important, very useful tool in these struggles, also protective magic. But, you know, as they say, the witches, a witch who cannot harm, cannot heal. In order to understand how to remove a hex and remove a curse, you've got to know how they work. So what I'd like to do today is discuss a few historical hexes, set out the scene, outline some of my own personal practice, not giving too much details, but hopefully as a kind of inspiration to other people. So I just mentioned this classic quote, a witch who cannot hex, no, a witch who cannot harm, cannot heal. Now, when most people look at these kind of historical intersections of magic and political practice, specifically in the West, this quote is often attributed to Susana Budapest, who was a Hungarian hereditary witch operating in California. I want to say San Francisco, but I need to check that up, in like the 1960s. Now, if anyone knows, any witches listening know about Susana Budapest, don't worry, I'm about to critique the shit out of her, but I think it's important to mention. So Susana, within like the kind of 60s, 70s goddess movement, which was inherently tied up within second wave feminism, Susana Budapest and her coven, operating on the West Coast, they didn't call themselves this, but hex positive. They would throw around curses, for example, against rapists, people who are victims of sexual assault. They would hex the shit out of their rapists. So rather, or I think alongside going through the judicial system, which often justice is not served there, they would do things like have a black candle shaped like a peanut and stick loads of pins in it and burn it and these kind of things. So that was setting the scene of making witchcraft radical again. But unfortunately, Susana Budapest, and this was quite rife within the 1960s, 70s white witchcraft, fucking TERF, trans exclusionary feminism. She believes, still to this day, that, you know, witchcraft belongs to those with wombs, and if you're not a witch who bleeds or crone, you know, maiden, in that sense, you're not a witch. That's what she says, and to that I say fucking bullshit. There's a phrase I came across many years ago from queer andinista herbalist Loba Loca, which is all bodies of water dance to the rhythm of the moon. I'm not going to deny that there is certain power and magic from, you know, the womb, period blood, all that, but that's not the only way. And this is why the practice of 60s, 70s white feminists needs to be critiqued, which it has, and thankfully many people have moved beyond that. So for me, that's why Hex-Positive, I like this word. I feel it's inclusive. It acknowledges that there's a variety of practices and practitioners. Yeah. So another of these second wave feminist social movements who did use hexing in order to challenge the powers that be, they were named WIT.C.H, Women's International Terrorist Conspiracy from Hell. So again, second wave feminists of the goddess movement, they were kind of more of the performative theatrical tradition. So what would they do? For example, their first act was going out to hex Wall Street, and they say the next day the Dow Jones fell significantly. What else did they do? They poured concrete into the plumbing of Playboy mansions and setting off white mice at bridal fairs and all these kind of classic, you can imagine these 60s, 70s trickster protest movements. But again, as I said, this movement should be critiqued, because if you imagine all these like kind of witchy hippies, this was in, you know, the time when they had the summer of love and all this lot, but also the same time that the Black Panthers are on the street once again demanding racial justice, which has still not yet been achieved. So yeah, as well, it just rived with like white feminism. There wasn't really an anti-colonial narrative there. And I feel if you are interested in kind of like progressive 70s witchcraft, well, in the white circle, I guess Starhawk is a classic who seems to have stood the test of time. But I'm just going to go with the classic Audre Lorde. Like, I mean, she might not have explicitly been completely submerged in witchcraft communities, but through her poetry and speaking, it's pretty spot on. So like this book, you know, because I like to show a book, Black Unicorn, always been a favourite of mine. Yeah, so that was then. What about these days? Hex-positive practices. So in the wake of Trump, Witch International Terrorist Conspiracy from Hell got a revamp. And so they're now, you know, their critical discourse is pro-sex worker, anti-colonial, fighting for Indigenous rights. And, you know, these people are actually very photogenic. You might have seen pictures of them at protests, all in black, with a big black hat, black sign saying things like, "We are the witches that you couldn't burn, hex the patriarchy, hex white supremacy," all this kind of thing. So I guess they're working very much in the realm of hex positivity. Okay, decided to move again once more because it's blooming hot out here. So the updated International Witch Conspiracy from Hell. So a lot of attention in the Trump area has been brought through mainstream media practices of this movement that wanted to bind Donald Trump. So since the 49th Orange What's-It fool got into power, this group has been on the Waning Crescent Moon doing a binding ritual against Donald Trump to stop him from committing injustices and they get a lot of media attention. And so a binding is not really a hex, it's more going against someone's will, preventing them from doing harm, which ethically could be considered kind of problematic because it's like going against someone's will. But so these kind of people, this bind Donald Trump said, oh, it's not a hex, it's a binding, and kind of aren't as radical really as we should be. But in response to that, there is this place in New York, I would say it's a witch shop, but also more like a witch community, who in response to this decided to hex Donald Trump, which is pretty bold, got a lot of attention. And so when I was in New York, of course I went to Catlin Books to check it out, and I found a very special zine, which is War Witch, The Art and the Ethics of Cursing by Dakota St. Clare, who's one of the co-owners of Catlin Books. And it's a very good zine, I'd recommend it to anyone. Definitely a lot of the ideas that I'd already had, just put it down on paper, so you know I'm not thinking I'm just like some crazy cursing fool. But something I found very interesting in here, which is something I kind of been thinking about, but they explain it very well, is that, you know, a lot of people when they consider hexing, like, oh, that's black magic, that's evil. And so what they say is that the distinction between white and black magic is in fact a colonial one, and has been used to oppress the other for many, many years, centuries even. And so this is partly what I have been researching, is how, you know, after the Witch Inquisition, once the witches of Europe, as well as just like powerful women or heretics who challenged the status quo, once they'd been disciplined, then the sights were turned to the new colonies. So the encounter with West African spiritual practices were demonized and considered black magic. Now, I'm not going to get into the specific details here today, but also, so a lot of West African spiritual practices, which then were taken across the Atlantic, involve what, you know, Western academics would consider spirit possession. And the idea of possession is inherently linked in with establishing ideas of private property. If your individual person can be infiltrated, is the right word, let's just say, use the correct terminology, mounted by a spirit, then that puts into question your individuality and ability to possess property. But so a lot of these practices were demonized and considered black magic, which again, colonial imposition, and we need to get beyond that. And so discussing this, what we really need to be talking about, I've just given you, you know, the genealogy of white witchcraft and how hexing has been used to challenge the social system. But really what we should be looking at when we're looking at how magical practices have been used to challenge systems, unequal structures, is one of my, not favourite because it's a terrible bloody history, but something I find fascinating is the Haitian Revolution, which, I mean, it's the only successful uprising of the enslaved, establishment of the Black Republic in our whole world history. And it started with a Voodoo ceremony back in 1791. Bois Caiman was the ceremony in which initiated the revolution, when it was led by Boukman Dutty and Cecile Fatiman, both practitioners of voodoo, so they would be called a Hungan and a Mambo. Cecile Fatiman was mounted by the Erzili Danto, who is part of the Erzili pantheon. She is considered the mother of everyone and the wife of none. And what's more, she's considered to be a queer working class woman who rallied the troops and encouraged people to fight for their own freedom. So we have that as kick-starting the successful uprising of the enslaved, and helped significantly contributed to establishing the Black Republic of Haiti. Also very much used in the States in rebellions of the enslaved, as well as in New Orleans. Now, voodoo there is a bit different to Haitian voodoo, and but still a lot of like late night gatherings and practices which were considered demonic or, you know, black magic, because if you are oppressed, if you're fucking either enslaved and working all day, or looking back in time to like the heretic movements of Europe, peasant rebellions, if you need to gather and plan an uprising, probably going to do it at night, maybe around a fire, you know. And something that is very important in hexing, and this is why I'm not going to reveal too much, and in the cases of the uses of like Afro-diasporic religions as a form of like political action, secrecy is key. It's what gives it a lot of power, and also don't want to be giving away any tactics of the oppressed. And so that's why in my own studies, these are things I've been looking at, is how magical practices have been used in the service of social justice, specifically in uprisings of oppressed people and the enslaved. But secrecy is important, and also, you know, just having not inclusive but enclosed spaces. There's a lot of importance there to, oh, I'm losing my train of thought. Basically what I'm trying to say is, shouldn't go sticking your nose in. What right do I have to go investigating what goes on in, you know, closed practices, because I don't want to do harm by knowing and sharing these things. So with this in mind, I was encouraged to move from the classroom into action, and rather than, I mean, I'm still studying historical hexes, but also doing them ourselves. Now, to return to a point that I made, that the system of white supremacy and the kind of inquisition against Afro-diasporic Black Atlantic religious practice was a continuation of the Inquisition. Now, it definitely is a lot worse than the European witch hunts, because racial injustice, slavery, and the violence inherent within that was woven in as well. But this is just, if you're a white witch and you don't feel in some way connected to this struggle, then you're not a witch worth your salt, you know. And it's time for us to start trying to change things.